The winter the sky broke white over Dusthaven. Even the crows stopped flying. Snow fell like powdered glass, soft but endless, swallowing fences, trails, and sins alike. Folks said the cold had teeth that year, sharp enough to bite through faith. And maybe they were right, because that's when she came back. Eveline May, wrapped in burlap like a ghost that didn't quite know where to haunt. No one spoke her name at first. They just watched through frosted windows as she trudged past the general store, dragging behind her a small wooden crate, and the sound of things left unsaid. Her boots made no mark on the snow, as if even the ground refused to claim her. Word spread before dusk. The beast in the sack has returned. I remember the way the sheriff looked away when she passed. The way Mrs. Callow's curtains trembled with the weight of gossip. The way children, too young to understand cruelty but eager to imitate it, hurled snowballs at her back until one struck her shoulder and crumbled like dust. She didn't flinch, just kept walking toward the old shack by the frozen creek, the one that had belonged to her father before he drank himself into the ground. No one followed her. No one offered help. It wasn't that people in Dusthaven were born mean. It's just that fear made them comfortable that way. They said Eveline's face had burned away in the fire that took her husband, that she wore the sack to keep the rest of us from turning to stone. Some whispered she'd lit the match herself. Others swore it was punishment from God for a prideful heart. The truth didn't matter. Dusthaven liked its monsters simple, and its mercy scarce. That night, as I shoveled snow from the livery, I saw her through the drifting white. She moved like someone carrying the weight of her own ashes. I should have said something, offered help, maybe a kind word. But words, when they're meant to heal, come slow to men like me. So I watched instead, the way everyone else did, as the burlap ghost disappeared into the tree line and the world went quiet again. 2 days later, a new shadow rode in from the north. Cassian Holt, though folks would soon call him the giant cowboy. He was built like a barn door and carried silence like a second gun. He rode a bay horse half his size and spoke to no one but the wind. The saloon keeper tried small talk, got nothing but a nod. I remember thinking he looked like a man running from something too heavy to carry, but too sacred to drop. That night, while Dusthaven drank and pretended not to care about the storm clawing at the windows, Cass saw her. Eveline was gathering firewood near the creek, her hands raw, the sack stiff with frost. He watched her for a long moment, then lifted a hand in greeting. Not pity, not curiosity. Just a nod, a small human acknowledgement. She froze like a deer, eyes bright through the frayed cloth, then turned and left. The next morning, he was splitting logs behind the livery when he noticed her door's hinge broken, hanging by a single nail. He repaired it without a word. A day later, she found a loaf of bread on her step, coarse but still warm. Dusthaven noticed, of course. It always did. By the week's end, talk in the saloon turned meaner. Guess the beast found herself a pet, one man laughed. Another added, a big one too. Maybe he don't mind the smell. Cass said nothing, just drank his whiskey in silence and looked through the frosted window toward the creek. The laughter died down, uneasy. There was something in his stillness that reminded people of the quiet right before thunder. Eveline kept to herself. Her days were small and ritual-like, fetching water, mending her father's old coat, tending a fire that never seemed to warm her bones. But sometimes she'd step outside at dusk, look toward town, and for just a heartbeat her posture softened, as if she'd remembered she was still part of the same world. Once, she saw Cass riding past with a bale of hay slung over his shoulder. He tipped his hat. She didn't wave, but I swear I saw her breath hitch in the cold. One night, the wolves came. Their howls rode the wind like the cry of something ancient. Dusthaven slept through it, except for her. Eveline stood by the window, candlelight trembling. The shadows moved outside, low and silent. Then, a single rifle shot cracked the air, echoing down the creek. The wolves scattered. She opened the door, snow swirling into the room like ghosts returning home. Cass was there, rifle in hand, smoke curling from the barrel. He didn't speak, just nodded again and walked away into the snowstorm. She whispered after him, barely louder than the wind. Thank you. After that, something shifted. Small things, mostly. He'd leave firewood stacked higher than before. She'd leave his horse an apple. They didn't meet eyes often, but when they did, the silence between them felt almost sacred, as if both had found something familiar in the other's ruin. Dusthaven didn't like it. They liked their stories tidy, their sinners separate. By Christmas Eve, the gossip had curdled into cruelty. The Reverend, though kind in spirit, began preaching about temptations of pity and souls best left in the Lord's judgment. People nodded. It was easier than thinking. That night, Cass brought Eveline a lantern. For the dark, he said. voice like gravel smoothed by rain. It was the first time he'd spoken to her. She stared at the light, then at him, her hands trembling slightly before taking it. "The dark's not so bad," she murmured, her voice soft and rough from disuse. "It hides what scares people." He nodded once. "Maybe they just don't know how to look." Then he left. Days passed, and the air grew colder. The creek froze solid, the horse's breath turning to steam that lingered like ghosts of warmth. Eveline began walking to town for supplies, though she still wore the sack. One morning at the market, a group of women stopped their chatter when she approached. One of them, Clara Finch, sharp-tongued and mean with boredom, leaned close and said, "You think hiding your face makes you decent? That sack don't fool no one." Eveline didn't answer. She placed her coins on the counter, bought her flour, and left. But I saw her later that day sitting by the frozen creek, her shoulders shaking beneath the burlap. It wasn't the cold making her tremble. Cass found her there. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside her, his shadow long against the snow. Then without a word he knelt and started mending the fence near her shack, broken from neglect, boards rotted through. She watched, silent as his hands worked. When he was done, he pulled off his gloves and handed them to her. She hesitated. He waited. Finally, she took them. For the first time the sack slipped a little as she lifted her face. The firelight from her window caught the side of her cheek. Scarred, yes, but not monstrous. Just human. Tired, brave, and heartbreakingly real. Cass didn't look away. He just said quietly, "You'll freeze without these." Her breath left her in a cloud of steam. "You shouldn't be kind to me," she whispered. He straightened, snow falling between them. "Ain't kindness," he said, "just truth." That night I couldn't sleep. The snow kept falling, soft and endless, burying the world in white. Somewhere by the creek, a lantern burned steady against the wind. And for the first time in a long while, Dusthaven felt less like a place that judged, and more like a place that remembered. The days that followed moved slow, like honey over frost. Cass repaired her roof before the next storm, and Eveline began to hum again. Low, trembling tunes that carried through the trees. I think she believed no one could hear her, but I did. One afternoon, I passed her shack while leading a mule home. She stood outside, eyes closed, face turned toward the faint sunlight breaking through the clouds. The sack was gone. For a moment I almost called out, almost told her that her face, though scarred, looked softer than any saint I'd ever prayed to. But I didn't. Because some moments aren't meant to be touched. They're meant to be witnessed. When she opened her eyes, she saw Cass riding down the trail. He paused, tipped his hat again. This time she smiled. A small, trembling smile that seemed to thaw the air between them. Then she turned and went inside. That's how it began. Not with a confession or a kiss or any of the loud things that make towns talk, but with a nod, a lantern, and a pair of gloves traded in silence. Two souls, half frozen by the world, learning the slow language of warmth. And though none of us could have known it then, that quiet winter was about to change everything Dusthaven thought it knew about beasts, and about the kind of love that grows only in the cold. Those faintly glowing. Cass kept to his own cabin, but his tracks in the snow always led in her direction. Never deeper into town. People noticed, though they pretended not to. The sheriff mentioned him once at the saloon, half a grin hiding half a warning. "That big fella's gonna get burned playing near that sack woman," he said. No one laughed this time. Cass had a way of silencing rooms even when he wasn't there. He carried no threat in his tone or walk, but something about his stillness reminded people of the space between thunder and strike. Then came the night the sky turned red. I was dozing near the livery when the smell of smoke tore through the cold. Flames clawed up from the creek bend, wild and starving. Eveline's shack was burning. The wind fed the fire like gossip feeds cruelty. I ran, shouting, but Cass was already there, bare-armed, cutting through the blaze. He tore down the door with one shoulder, vanished into the heat, and came back carrying her wrapped in a blanket, her hair singed, her skin shining with sweat and soot. The townsfolk gathered as if drawn by guilt. The sack she'd worn for years was gone, burned to nothing. Her face, yes, scarred, twisted in places by fire long past, was naked before them. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Mrs. Callow gasped, turned away, muttering a prayer like a weapon. Others followed, eyes wide with pity or disgust. Cass's voice cut through the murmurs, low and steady. "Ain't no beast," he said. "Just a woman who walked through hell and kept walking." He laid her on the snow, his coat covering her face. Not to hide it, but to keep her warm. His hands trembled as he brushed the ashes from her hair. Eveline's eyes fluttered open. "It's gone," she whispered. He looked down at her. "Let it burn," he said. "She didn't die that night. The Reverend tended to her in Cass's cabin, the only warm place left with a roof still standing. She was fevered for days, drifting between worlds. Cass sat beside her through every hour, silent, unmoving, as if guarding the threshold she balanced on. When she woke at last, the world outside had softened, the snow no longer falling, the air holding its breath. She tried to sit up, but he stopped her with a hand on her shoulder. "Rest easy," he murmured. "I thought you'd gone," she said, her voice a thread of smoke. "Didn't know where else to be," he replied. They spoke little after that, but silence between them no longer felt like absence. It was a language built from shared ghosts. She mended one of his shirts. He built her a new door from cedar planks, salvaged from the livery. They didn't thank each other. They didn't need to. The gossip cooled for a time. Dusthaven found new distractions, card games, feuds, weather. But there were those who couldn't stand peace when cruelty had once filled their lungs. The same boys who'd whispered jokes in the saloon began to drink deeper, their laughter turning meaner. I heard them one night. "Let's see what the beast looks like when she screams again." I should have warned Cass. I didn't. Shame makes cowards of witnesses. One gray morning, Eveline stepped into town without her sack. The cold was sharp, but she wore her scars like medals of some private war. She bought flour, salt, a spool of thread. The crowd parted for her, the way people do for things they both fear and admire. The Reverend met her eyes, bowed slightly, his face drawn with regret. "Miss May," he said, and she nodded once, as if accepting an apology that words couldn't frame. Cass watched from the ridge above town, hands in his coat pockets. When she turned toward him, her chin lifted. There was no hiding left in her, no need. The sun broke briefly through the clouds, painting her face in gold. For the first time, I think, she looked free. Freedom, though, has a way of testing those who earn it. That night the boys rode out, drunk and reckless, hollering through the valley like wolves that had lost their fear of the dark. They circled Cass's cabin, spitting insults, calling for the beast to come out and dance. Cass stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but lowered. His voice carried through the wind, calm and heavy. "You boys best ride home before the cold takes you." They jeered, emboldened by numbers. One fired a shot into the air. Another shouted something about monsters and men. Eveline opened the door behind Cass, light spilling onto the snow. "Please," she whispered, "don't." The leader, barely more than a boy with liquor for courage, raised his pistol, eyes wild. Cass didn't move, didn't even blink. The air froze between them. Then came the crack of gunfire, one single sound, sharp and echoing. When the smoke cleared, Cass was standing, his rifle steady, a thin ribbon of blood trickling down his arm where the bullet had grazed him. The boys scattered, spooked more by his silence than his aim. Eveline rushed to him, tearing her scarf into strips, binding the wound with shaking hands. He winced, but didn't pull away. "Why didn't you shoot to kill?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes tired but clear. "Because they're just boys. I remember when I was one." Her hands stilled. "You're bleeding," he smiled faintly. Not the first time. For a long while after, neither spoke. The snow fell again, gentle now, settling over the footprints and the blood. When dawn came, the light turned the world silver. Eveline sat beside him on the porch, her head resting against his shoulder. He stared out at the horizon, the air steaming from his breath. "I used to think," she said quietly, "that the fire took everything from me." He waited. But it left one thing behind. "What's that?" "My heart." I just didn't recognize it anymore. Cass's jaw tightened, as if holding back something too heavy for words. Finally, he said, "Maybe that's what the fire was for, to burn off everything that wasn't real." She smiled then, softly, without fear. Her face, lit by the first sunrise in weeks, seemed less scarred. Or maybe I'd just forgotten what she looked like before. Sometimes love does that. It changes the eyes faster than the heart. By spring, the creek began to thaw. The ice cracked like old guilt, giving way to something gentler. Dusthaven, too, softened. The children no longer whispered when she passed. Folks nodded to Cass in the streets, some even tipping their hats to Eveline. The world didn't change overnight, but it began to breathe differently, slower, kinder. One evening, I found them both outside the rebuilt shack, painting the door a warm shade of red. The color looked almost defiant against the snow. Cass caught me watching and gave a small nod. Eveline laughed softly, the sound fragile but real, like glass ringing in the wind. Later, as the sun sank low, I asked her if she'd ever forgive Dusthaven. She looked toward the town lights flickering in the distance. "Maybe," she said, "forgiveness isn't for them. It's so I can live without hate." Cass placed a hand on her shoulder. and she leaned into it, eyes closed. The air around them shimmered with the last breath of winter, carrying the faint smell of cedar smoke and something like hope. I remember thinking, then, that not all fires destroy. Some simply burn long enough to show us who's willing to walk through them with us. Years have passed since that winter, and the stories become a whisper folks tell when the nights grow long. They say the giant cowboy tamed the beast, but they never understood. There was no taming, no saving, just two broken souls finding enough warmth in each other to melt the cold that surrounded them. When I ride by their old place now, I still see that red door, faded but standing. The wind hums through the grass, carrying bits of the past like snowflakes refusing to fall. I think of Eveline's laugh, of Cass's silence, and of the way both learned to live without hiding. And if you've listened this long, friend, take this with you. The world will always have its dust havens, its gossip, its cruel winters. But kindness, quiet, stubborn kindness, can thaw more than snow. It can turn beasts into people, and people into light. So be gentle with what you don't understand. Look twice before you turn away. Somewhere behind every sack, every scar, every silence, there's a story waiting to be seen. Now, if this tale found its way to your heart, stay a while. There are more winters to remember, more souls to warm. Subscribe to Wild West Tales, and let the next story ride in on the snow.